So this part is going to be harder to do succinctly. The Arab awakening, spring, and Libya. So to summarize, the rebellion in Libya is part of 8 or 9 Arab and Middle Eastern companies that are having simultaneous pro-democracy uprisings. We assume that in Libya it's the same thing. Rebels there have one difference though. It starts very violently because they break into a police station before doing demonstrations. Whether that's right or wrong, that's what happened. The first outbreak was really armed. So I didn't notice that on the radar as a negative at that time. And then 2 Ministry of Interior brigades were sent to crush the rebellion in Benghazi, and they defected over with this fellow, Mr. Yunus, who's now part of the core of the government, and he was in charge of the most dreaded secret police unit in one of the top 20 certainly in the world. So to preface that, I want to say that there's been a total media blackout on the fact that Libya had the highest standard of living in Africa or the Middle East for a country with its characteristics, its revenues. It has a high degree of reinvestment. Gaddafi financed revolutionary movements all over the world, and he also financed a lot of African projects. He financed the construction of the first African telecommunication system that didn't have an extortion of 500 million a year to the Europeans, according to one article, which I have on my playlist on Libya. So then what happens is, so you've got 2 brigades. That should be at least 5,000 men. Then you got the rebels, whoever they are. They're half the country, 3 million people, and 1 son per family showed up, or even, 1 son per 40 families showed up. You would have numbers in the tens of thousands. But what happens is there's a theory that we're going to have 8,000 men going towards Sirte from Benghazi, basically from east to west to get to its hometown, which is actually close to the middle, through the oil fields conveniently on the way, and the main water irrigation pipes which come out of this ancient sea of fresh water buried under the Libyan desert that they've irrigated through their whole country without any Western assistance, with tunnels like we bore now for highways through mountains for carrying the water. So at any rate, only about 1,500 materialized in the first reports. So I was very disappointed because I was excited about the rebellion, and my guys were not coming out. Where are they? I wanted to root for my side. So then I started to research this, and I found out, first of all, pretty quickly, this business that Libya had this amazing infrastructure for size and resources, free medicine, free education, a penny gallon, a liter for gas, 4 cents a gallon, and for bread, and no taxes on agricultural workers, and women had equal rights in the workplace. So there were a lot of positives about Libya that have not been discussed at all in the media. It's just we're supposed to immediately fall in line and say he's this terrible dictator who murders his own people. And what happens in a civil war? Did Abraham Lincoln murder his own people? You bet he did. Like 500,000 of them. If you just count the southern casualties, you don't count the meat grinder that these incompetent northern generals put these people through at Fredericksburg, for example. Anyway, so we've got a situation now where our guys aren't showing up, and Gaddafi actually is rolling them right back to where they started in Benghazi. And we're all saying no fair. He's got 2,500 tanks, and they're going to go down, and they're going to be slaughtered. And so let's send in the cavalry. So that part I'm willing to concede. So now comes the time when Mr. Obama gets a visit from Mrs. Clinton. She says they're about to invade Benghazi, and there could be terrible repercussions. The rebellion will be exterminated. Potentially extinguished. So he calls in his advisors. To the CIA, they say, well, this is the problem with Libya are manifold politically, and it would be excellent if we could drop this guy. And they talk to the Defense Department. They say, last thing we need is Egypt and Tunisia having a country between them that's a radicalized Islamic leftist country that arms revolutions. It'll create a center for an anti-Western sentiment. And then he'll go to the economics department, the treasury, and the Fed, and they're going to say he was going to introduce a gold dinar, which would have totally destabilized Western currencies. And if that had been successful, and they wouldn't put it this way because this is the truth and they don't want to describe the truth even to themselves. So they'll describe it in some other fashion. But basically, Gaddafi was trying to unify the developing world to have a currency even stronger, especially in the age of commodities power. So we didn't hear all of this. The guys dug in, and now we got our no-fly zone. What I just described to you, the meeting Obama had, is pretty obvious. He would at least call for a UN resolution to enforce a no-fly zone, which is where we basically bomb the crap out of their country's military infrastructure. Now, if they rebuild that infrastructure, we're already talking $20 billion of damage. Rather than doing a negotiation. And the way you do negotiations is you show respect for the other side. You don't have to show it in the media, but you can show respect for the other side, even if they're the worst monsters in the world. That's what Roosevelt did with Stalin. He didn't trivialize him and snipe at him, although we did with Hitler. But we're trying to, so at any rate, but Gaddafi is not a Hitler. He hasn't invaded other countries. He's armed a lot of uprisings. He did go into Chad once, but it wasn't a massacre. He intervened in the civil war of an adjacent neighbor for the government. But he's basically, buried the hatchet with the West and doing business with the West. So then comes the misinterpretation of the UN mandate. And now, instead of protecting civilians, we're trying to kill him when we're calling for regime change. So you ask one guy in the Western power structure, what are we doing? And he'll say, we are protecting civilians. And you ask another guy the same question, and he'll say, well, we're protecting civilians by surgically removing their command and control, including their private homes of Gaddafi. But it's still, we're protecting civilians. You could protect a civilian by turning the sun off because then they couldn't find the civilian. I mean, you can make very stretchy arguments about this. And they have been. They've been making insane arguments about what is protecting civilians. Killing people is protecting civilians. Bombing buildings is protecting civilians. You've got the Gaddafi regime puzzled because they were doing this cooperation with the West. And of course, so to make a long story short, there are people now, you ask another guy, says, oh, we're there because Gaddafi has to go. Now, why are we all supposed to go? Gaddafi has to go. Gaddafi has to go. What does that tell you about the level of discourse and the complexity and the nuances of the situation and the understanding of them? Can't we at least discuss why Gaddafi? He's a monster and he kills his own people. They have the highest standard of living in the Middle East. And on top of that, for a country of their size and resources, and in fact, just straight up, 72 years age, life expectancy, 20 in 1,000 infant mortality, probably lower in the U.S., lower poverty rate in the U.S., free medicine, free education, free paid education abroad. So he is a hell of a monster. Yes, it's politically like East Germany, but it would be like East Germany with incredible social benefits. And then on top of it, we want to bomb all of that now. There's these guys calling for just leveling everything there. And so who is going to pay to rebuild all of this? Who has the right to damage other people's property and intervene in their civil war? So if you intervene in their civil war, it should be to cause an armistice followed by a plebiscite where you send in observers to each governorate. You conduct a plebiscite whether they want to be on the Gaddafi side or on the rebel side in terms of administration of their province prior to a national election. Everyone will go for this. You don't wipe out their technocrat class. In my opinion, you allow a minority socialist party to exist just like in Russia. The communists have not made a comeback. It's actually been this their security services, their military-industrial complex, but they could creep in through capitalism or socialism. So that's all I got for you for part 2. But don't believe what you hear. And there's plenty more questions about why we're there.